Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ange Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 2 must-start players for the 2022 fantasy football season. Now, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about 5 players, 3 running backs and 2 wide receivers that you should be reconsidering going into your Week 2 matchups. Again, when I talk about must-start players, I'm not talking about obvious players that are in the top 12 of my rankings. I'm looking for players who are currently being started in less than 30% of Yahoo leagues. So I've gone ahead, collected 5 names. I'll give you guys my arguments and the statistics that justify the reasons as to why I believe you should be reconsidering these prospects and potentially starting them in your Week 2 matchups. Now, before we begin, I want to thank you guys for supporting the channel. Of course, clicking the like button down below, commenting, and of course, subscribing. If you guys haven't yet already, be sure to do so. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2022 season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. Try to help us get to our goal of 70,000 subscribers. Be greatly appreciated. So after we go ahead and talk about my top 5 must-start players who are currently being started in less than 30% of leagues going into Week 2, we'll then transition to the conversation of talking about pick'ems. Again, for those of you who haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy and want to continue to play fantasy football outside of your own respective leagues, check them out. There's a link down in the description. We're going to go ahead, put together some pick'em slips, picking higher or lower on a given player statistic. If you go ahead, click the link, sign up today, and make a first-time deposit using promo code Andrew, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. So go ahead, check that out. Take advantage of that opportunity. Thank you very much. Now, before we begin to talk about Rhamondre Stevenson and his potential in Week 2, I do want to present the results of Week 1's must-start players. This was their current start percentage as of last Friday when I recorded the video. Elijah Moore, Brandon Ayuk, Miles Sanders, Kareem Hunt, Mike Davis, Julio Jones, and Gerald Everett. Those are the 7 players that I spoke about, talking about them being must-start players in Week 1. We reconsidered them. I obviously adjusted my rankings accordingly, and those are the results that we found in a half PPR scoring format. If you play in a standard league, if you play in a league that has extra bonuses, full PPR, it's not going to match up in terms of similar fantasy points, but in a regular half PPR scoring format, this is what we found. Of course, Elijah Moore, who was the thumbnail, didn't have the greatest week, but I will say, fourth quarter, 1 minute and 22 seconds remaining, he scored a touchdown and was called back due to a penalty. Unfortunate, but that is the reality of the situation. I'll take the L on that. Then we go to Brandon Ayuk. Even though it was a terrible weather game, I will also say that I came out and I told people on Sunday morning to still play him because I looked at the weather and I didn't believe it was going to be as bad as it was. And my goodness, did it get out of hand relatively quickly. I'll take the L on that as well. As for Miles Sanders, obviously that was a great matchup. I'm sure we all recognize the fact that playing against Detroit should be a must-start play. Kareem Hunt, we knew he was going to continue to be as effective as he was in seasons past. There's nothing to say differently from this offseason. Obviously, there was some trade speculation, but that didn't mean that they weren't going to use him to his maximum potential. Mike Davis, I should have probably just known better than to start Mike Davis. I didn't learn from his Atlanta days, and I probably should have known. But either way, I thought I'll take the L on that. And then Julio Jones, Gerald Everett, both of them played well. Even Gerald Everett last night, Thursday Night Football, continues to play well. 10 targets, 6 catches. He's going to continue to pay dividends and maybe is going to continue to be in that top 12 conversation at the tight end position rest of season. But either way, 4-3, 4 W's, 3 L's. Could have been, really, if that weather game and that Elijah Moore touchdown wasn't called back, very easily could have been a 6 out of 7, but we're going to try to get better. We're going to try to be more accurate this week. So let's begin by talking about Rhamondre Stevenson. So as of Week 1's performance, Rhamondre Stevenson isn't really gaining much hype. He only played 14 of the 56 total snaps, which is 25% of the game. He only had 8 rushing attempts for 25 yards, a 3.1 yard per carry average, and got very little utilization overall. Receiving game, 2 targets, 2 receptions, only 2 yards, 3.7 half PPR fantasy points. Now, you may look at that scoreline and think, yeah, this is someone that I cannot afford to start in my flex position or even in my RB2 in a deeper league. But I want you to reconsider it because of the circumstances that we are facing in Week 2. Ty Montgomery, who was the primary third down back for that team, is no longer going to be there. He is on the injured reserve. With Ty Montgomery gone, we have a player out of that backfield who played 20 of the 56 snaps, which was 35.71% of the offensive snaps, just slightly behind Damien Harris. Damien Harris played 22 snaps. Ty Montgomery played 20. And of course, like I mentioned prior, Rhamondre Stevenson only played 14. So if we are in fact giving more opportunity to Rhamondre Stevenson to step up into that third down back role, again, Ty Montgomery, 4 targets, 3 catches, 15 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Now, I will admit that the receiving touchdown that he had, I could have scored that touchdown. It was blown coverage, and he literally caught the ball on the floor and rolled into the end zone. I could have been able to accomplish that nonetheless. I think that if, in fact, we are getting more opportunities for Rhamondre Stevenson, not only as a running back, but as a receiving threat out of this backfield, he's going to elevate his overall potential of fantasy point contribution, which is going to make him a viable option, which is what we expected prior to the season beginning and why we drafted him in the first place. On Sunday against the Miami Dolphins, Rhamondre Stevenson had all of his opportunities and touches on first and second down. Now, if you give him that opportunity to get work on third downs, and we already know Damian Harris isn't the favored receiving threat in this backfield, obviously we're going to see a lot more work out of Rhamondre Stevenson. Now, when I went ahead and watched the entire game yesterday, I found that Rhamondre Stevenson came out and was the starter on 2 separate series, while the rest of them, Damian Harris started. So it was like a 5-2 split, Damian Harris obviously in advantage. But if in fact those third downs are going to open up for him, Damian Harris only had 1 opportunity and touch on third down on Sunday. And it was a 3rd and 3 rushing attempt, which they eventually went forward on 4th down. So in my opinion, Rhamondre Stevenson is going to continue to be in this mix. And as long as Mac Jones wants to continue to dump off the ball to his running backs, Rhamondre should be in a perfect position to succeed. Let's move on to Michael Carter. I was surprised that Michael Carter ended up on this list. When I was kind of scouring the Yahoo start percentages and I found that he was only being started in 27% of leagues, it was quite surprising considering he played 60% of the offensive snaps on Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens, in which he had 10 carries for 60 yards and a 6.0 yard per carry average, while also garnering 9 targets that led to 7 catches and 40 receiving yards, 13 and a half PPR fantasy points, and a full PPR that just continues to elevate and makes him a viable option easily. Now, going into this upcoming weekend's matchup, people aren't really starting him, which doesn't make sense to me. If in fact we are going to have the primary starting running back of the New York Jets, who played 60% of the snaps, who had 17 touches, once again in the mix, going up against the Cleveland Browns, I want to start him. And there was even a possibility that he could have scored a touchdown. Earlier this week on my running back episode, I said that he may not be as good as other running backs because the touchdown upside isn't there. When I went back and I watched the entire game of film, when you get to the 4th quarter, 4 minutes and 22 seconds left, wide open, out of the backfield, drops a touchdown. Again, he could have had himself a 20-point week, which would make people not question starting him. They would immediately do so. But yet, we have a little bit of a confrontation here, a little bit of a difference in opinion. As of right now, when you're associated with Joe Flacco as your starting quarterback, you should expect a lot of running back targets. I went ahead and extrapolated some stats regarding that. In the last 14 starts that Joe Flacco has had, he has targeted his running backs 7.71 times per game. That has led to 6 catches, 38 receiving yards, and 0 receiving touchdowns. If we're going to see anything close to what we saw last week continue to be the case, of course, Michael Carter is going to be a viable option. And even when you go back to 2017, Joe Flacco, when he was fully healthy in that 16-game season, he was targeting his running backs out of the backfield 9.13 times per game, which led to 7 receptions per game. I'm expecting Michael Carter to be utilized on the ground, through the air, and maybe even have some touchdown upside against Cleveland this week. Moving on, let's talk about Sterling Shepard, the first wide receiver for today's episode. Sterling Shepard is a wide receiver that a lot of people really don't even have him rostered. He's only being started in 1% of leagues going into week 2. And the reason why I wanted to mention him is because the current circumstance gives him opportunity. With Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney both injured, Wan'Dale Robinson dealing with a knee injury, Kadarius Toney once again with that hamstring, we are going to see Sterling Shepard be a vital part of this entire offense. Now, when we look at what Sterling Shepard accomplished last week, 4 targets, 2 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown, 14.1 fantasy points. You may think, man, that's a great performance. Okay, let's just hold our horses real quick. I will admit, this is a 1 catch, 65-yard touchdown. If you eliminate that, obviously it's not a great week. You only have 1 catch for literally 6 yards, and his entire performance is nullified. But it is a history of production from Sterling Shepard with Daniel Jones that we have seen that gives me confidence. Now, if you go back and you look at the last 13 games that healthy Daniel Jones and Sterling Shepard have played together, that going back all the way to 2020, Sterling Shepard was targeted on average 8.23 times per game. That led to 6.38 receptions, 67 receiving yards, and 0.4 receiving touchdowns per game, which is a 13 fantasy point per game average in the last 13 contests in a half PPR scoring format. Now, if you go ahead and just look at the last 7 games that they played together where both were healthy, he was able to get over 9 targets 5 out of those 7 games, was able to get over 70 receiving yards in 6 out of those 7 games, and was able to get himself a receiving touchdown in 4 out of those 7 games. Do not sleep on Sterling Shepard. Daniel Jones likes to utilize him within this offense. We have seen that be the case, whether that's in the slot position or out wide. And going into this upcoming weekend's matchup against the Carolina Panthers, I expect Sterling Shepard to find success, and that's why he's on today's list. Moving on, let's talk about Melvin Gordon. I had Melvin Gordon at the final running back slot in my weekly rankings. And as of right now, this is another player that we should be reconsidering. He played 41% of the offensive snaps on Monday against Seattle and was able to get himself 12 rushing attempts and 2 catches out of the backfield on 2 targets. 14 total touches in comparison to Javonte Williams, who had 18 total touches. He outcarried him on the ground, and though Javonte Williams is going to be used as the primary receiving threat, again, 12 targets, 11 catches, kind of a crazy number there, I expect Melvin Gordon to get a lot of utilization in this game against Houston. We just saw Jonathan Taylor completely tear apart this defense. 31 carries for 161 rushing yards. That's a 5.2 yard per carry average. Melvin Gordon coming off a week against Seattle, who in my opinion is a far better run-stopping defense in comparison to Houston, with a 4.83 yard per carry average. If, in fact, we're going to see a game in which it's going to be relatively one-sided, which I fully anticipate the Denver Broncos getting off to a hard start and putting up a good amount of points against Houston's defense, then we're going to see a lot of running in the second half. And if that's going to be the case, I anticipate Melvin Gordon to outcarry Javonte Williams in this game. And if my prediction is to come true, then Melvin Gordon has a lot of value and a lot of upside. Let's not forget, last week, inside the 5-yard line, Javonte Williams had 1 rushing attempt, led to a fumble. Melvin Gordon had 2 rushing attempts, 1 of them led to a fumble. They're pretty much going to be used as a 50-50 basis on that goal line. It kind of depends on who's in the game during that drive. If the rushing opportunity and potential red zone opportunity is available for Melvin Gordon, I expect this to be another player that is currently only being started in 22% of leagues to be a potential flex option going into week 2. The final player I wanted to mention, it is Allen Lazard. Now, if in fact Allen Lazard is healthy this week, I would give him some consideration considering what we have seen from him in the past and what the wide receiver position had in store for us in week 1 for the Green Bay Packers against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, in week 1, we saw Romeo Doubs put up 5 targets, 4 catches, 37 yards, which led the entire wide receiver position for the team. Of course, we saw some sprinkles of Christian Watson, Sammy Watkins, we saw Randall Cobb. Obviously, a lot of opportunity went around, but ultimately, there wasn't a number 1 prime wide receiver. And we've heard even this offseason, Aaron Rodgers say, I think Allen is ready to make the jump to the number 1 wide receiver position for this team. Now, when we go back to 2021 and look at what Allen Lazard produced, he had a career high in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. He was utilized at his maximum capacity as a number 2 wide receiver who, yes, dealt with some injuries last year, but that's just a part of his deal. But when you go ahead and have him healthy for spans of time, he's been great. You go back to last year, weeks 14 through 18. He was averaging 14.54 half PPR fantasy points per game throughout that span of time, averaging only 5.6 targets per game. If you elevate his numbers, he'll get even better. Again, in the last 2 years with Aaron Rodgers, in the 8 games he was targeted 6 or more times, he averaged 14.34 fantasy points per game. With opportunity comes success, and especially when you're associated to one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league who is in desperate need for a primary number 1 wide receiver, I think Allen Lazard, who is currently only being started in 11% of leagues going into this upcoming week, I think he's a fantastic fantasy option. Okay, that's going to cover the 5 must-start players I wanted to mention for today. Let's go ahead and let's transition to the conversation regarding pick'ems. So first and foremost, this is how one of our pick'ems went last week. I'll go ahead and scroll a little bit. So we had a lot of the players that we mentioned last week. We had Everett, we had Kareem Hunt, we had Elijah Moore. All 3 of those went well. I expected Mike Gesicki, because of the fact that he was playing against New England, to not play well. And then Cordero Patterson wanted to go ahead and ruin my week. It was literally a $10 bet. If I was able to get all 5 of the hires or lowers correct, I would have been able to 20 times my overall money. We were very close to accomplishing that, and hopefully we'll be able to do that this upcoming week. But I just wanted to give you guys some results on that. Now, even last night, I tried to put together a 4-leg pick'em here, in which we had Mike Williams on the over in terms of fantasy points. Of course, I had him ranked within my top 12. Justin Herbert, I expected him to throw a ball a bunch because of the expectation of it being a higher scoring game. We expected Austin Eckler to get a lot of rushing attempts. We didn't expect him to get, snuffed on the goal line by a fullback, but it is what it is. And then we expected Travis Kelce to find the end zone. And unfortunately, because of the fact that he literally was caught at the 2-yard line, I missed this. Again, there's a reason why they've added an insurance policy to these pick'ems, and that's what we're going to go ahead and make sure that we accomplish this week. Now, based on the players that I've already talked about on today's episode, Rhamondre Stevenson, Sterling Shepard, Michael Carter, and Melvin Gordon, if I was going to make a $10 bet picking higher on all 4 of their singular categories, getting higher on Rhamondre Stevens receiving yards along with Sterling Shepard receiving yards, Michael Carter receptions, and Melvin Gordon rushing yards, I believe that all those hires are going to be in line. But if in fact I get unlucky, I'm going to turn on this insurance policy, because what it does is it gives you a chance to be able to at least miss one of these bets and still end up winning some money. I'm going to remove some of the risk and just hope that, yes, I expect all 4 of them to accomplish it, but if I get screwed over, I don't want to be the one that gets it wrong by just one leg of this overall higher or lower pick'em. So we'll turn this on, we'll submit this slip, confirm, and we're good to go. So let's go ahead and let's get into some of these other pick'ems. Again, there is a lot of different higher or lowers on given players, but as I went ahead and I kind of filtered through this prior to today's recording, I found a couple players that I was excited about that I kind of thought, okay, we can go ahead and take a risk on them. Obviously, Sterling Shepard, over 4 receptions. That's another one that I'm not against. I just like over the 40 receiving yards, considering, again, like I mentioned, he was able to get over 70 receiving yards in 6 out of the last 7 games that he has played with Daniel Jones under center. I'm excited about that potential. Of course, we've talked about Rhamondre Stevenson, but let's scroll down. I like Deontay Johnson, over 5.5 receptions. Now, he gets to go ahead and go up against the New England Patriots. And though that may be a tougher matchup, in your opinion, I truly do believe that Deontay Johnson over 5.5 receptions is an easy one, considering he's been able to accomplish that in 12 out of the last 17 games that he has played. Now, that includes whether it has been with Ben Roethlisberger, whether it's been with Mitch Trubisky, and even Mason Rudolph. So, when I look at this, I think to myself, if a player is going to get over 10 targets per game like he has over majority of the last 3 seasons here, I'm expecting Deontay Johnson to be highly utilized once again, and even in this matchup, find himself going on the over in terms of receptions. So we'll go ahead, we'll take that, and we'll continue to scroll down. Now, as I was scrolling down, I found that Miami Dolphins here with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I do want to mention the injuries that have taken place for the secondary of the Baltimore Ravens this week are pretty detrimental. Not only did they lose one of their starting cornerbacks to a torn ACL, Marlon Humphrey is dealing with an injury. I know Marcus Peters comes back, but one of their other cornerback secondary players is also dealing with another injury. If they're going to be down a bunch of starters in the secondary, I can assure you that players like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are going to have massive weeks. We just saw both these guys eclipse a lot of these numbers. Of course, Tyreek Hill, in terms of the receiving yards, the receptions, was getting a lot of utilization within this offense. Obviously, we want to see more opportunity for Jalen Waddle, but maybe if the matchup is a little bit easier, we may be able to see that this week and be able to eclipse these numbers. But either way, let's go ahead and scroll down. There's a lot of players that I wanted to mention, but I specifically want to talk about Antonio Gibson. I believe the hire is an automatic going into this upcoming week. Antonio Gibson, 14 fantasy points. The amount of utilization that he was given in terms of receiving work, 8 targets, 7 catches, being able to run routes down the field and make huge plays, because again, in college, he had more receptions than rushing attempts. He was a wide receiver, and now they're beginning to utilize him in that form. Great hands, great route running ability. In my opinion, considering the matchup, he's not only playing against Detroit, but he's getting so much opportunity out of this backfield. I think Antonio Gibson is an automatic for over 14 fantasy points. I expect him to find the end zone. There's a reason why not only Jalen Hurts was able to rush for a touchdown, but so was Kenneth Gainwell, Miles Sanders, and Boston Scott. Running the ball against this defense is relatively easy. Again, the Philadelphia Eagles averaged over 5 yards per carry against them. I'm expecting the Washington Commanders to be able to do the same. Scrolling down today's list, what else do we have here? We have some Detroit Lions, of course. They look kind of like, some spicy options there. Christian Kirk. Listen, I'm beginning to fall in love with Christian Kirk every single week. He continues to get that level of opportunity. Cordero Patterson, my worst nightmare. I'm not going to root against you, buddy. Just you go ahead and do you. But maybe we'll go against another player from this contest. Kyle Pitts, his current higher or lower is in regards to fantasy points. I talked about this during my tight end episode. I believe I'm leaning towards the lower, because as of right now, playing against the Los Angeles Rams, this is not an easy contest. And when I went ahead and looked at the last 22 games that the Los Angeles Rams have played, including last year and even week 1 of this year, we found that the Rams only gave up 10 or more fantasy points to 6 different tight ends. And in 4 of those 6 occasions, a touchdown was present. So if, in fact, Kyle Pitts wants to get into that conversation, he needs to find the end zone. And quite frankly, the fact that he has only been able to put up 10 fantasy points in 3 of his career games thus far is worrisome to me. So I'm thinking being able to eclipse that number is going to be very difficult. Now, we'll continue to scroll down. Of course, we have great players. The fact that we have Darrell Henderson at a 16 fantasy point per game projection here, and that is the higher or lower, I mean, Underdog knows something. And maybe they're tipping their cap here a little bit, but maybe, just maybe, Darrell Henderson needs to be started by all of us. I'm expecting him to be a top 20 back, but 16 fantasy points would get him into that top 12 conversation this week. Maybe I'm just under-projecting what his potential is. But let's talk about Cooper Kupp, because we know Cooper Kupp is a stud, and we know that we can rely upon him every single week to put up great numbers. Now, his current higher or lower in regards to fantasy points is 19.75. I looked at the last 22 games that he has played. He has been able to accomplish that and surpass 19.75 fantasy points, more like 20 fantasy points, in 14 out of the last 22 games. It is risky. It is a 50-50 coin flip to an extent, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the higher on that number. Now, the final player I wanted to mention is Amon-Ra St. Brown. I believe he's going to go higher on his overall reception statistic. He has been on a 7-game streak of 10 or more targets, 8 or more catches, 64 or more receiving yards, and he's been able to score 7 touchdowns in the last 7 games. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to finalize our 5-leg pick'em slip on higher or lowers. Let's go ahead. Let's pop this onto the screen. We have ourselves the following players. We're going to go ahead. We're going to put down a $10 bet. Now, again, I always somehow, some way mess it up in one way or the other, so I might be able to just go ahead and put the safety on it. I don't mind, but it's up to you. If you guys want to follow, you guys want to, fade, it's up to you. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take the insurance here. I don't mind 10 timesing my overall bet. We'll go ahead. We'll throw this in there. We'll confirm it. All right, that's pretty much going to cover it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for watching. Be sure to go ahead and check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew today. When you go ahead and click on the link down in the description and make a first-time deposit using promo code Andrew, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100 that you can use on the pick'ems or potentially their upcoming drafts. Again, we'll be live streaming tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time until 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where I'll be going over pick'ems, drafting some teams, answering questions. We'll, of course, also have a Sunday morning live stream like we do every single Sunday. Kickoff with Kurikoff, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I want to thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you have not yet already. Comment down below, click the like button. And until tomorrow's live stream, I'll see you guys. Peace.